Dr. Ray Mitch, your host, and we're in the midst of history making. This is episode 99. Next week will be our 100th episode, and I went back to listen to some of the things I was talking about almost 2 years to the day ago in 2020, April 15th. That's when the podcast got off and running, and I started out with a bang because I did 2 episodes on the same day. I did one introducing it, and then the second one talking a little bit about a little community in upstate New York near Niagara Falls called Love Canal. And it's funny to listen. I think next week when I do that episode, I'll let you listen in to the very first one where I was talking about the pandemic and what would it be like on the backside. And here we are 2 years later, and we have some opinions, I think it's safe to say, about what it's been like surviving a pandemic from the very beginning with being locked down and locked in our homes and everything else. So I think I might take some time to put together a retrospective of the podcast where it started out. It used to be called, I started out calling it Love You Later Bye podcast, the Psych Monologues. And we dropped the Love You Later Bye and put it at the end and made it simply the Psych Monologue. So thanks so much for joining me. We are in the last hurrah of April, and I wanted to take some time, and before I gotta get my introduction in, but I wanted to take some time to talk about something that has been weighing on me because of how often it seems like I have to remind myself, but also remind other people that I talk to about this in regards to our spiritual journey. So before I do that, let me introduce the Psych Monologues. It's a podcast that explores the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. So I invite you. Thank you so much for. I invite you or thank you. Which is it? So thank you so much for joining me for this brief moment in time. And so get comfortable, pull up a chair. Go take a walk, whatever it is you do as you consume podcasts. But let's talk about the things that matter the most to you. And I invite you to continue the dialogue or continue the reaction, whether that's on the website or through Instagram, or that if I say something or have said something that interests you or creates a question, please let me know, because I want to talk about the things that matter to you, where you live, what you think, how you feel about living life with yourself, with others, and with Jesus. So we are in this series that has an indefinite ending, which is probably not a good idea, but be that as it may, we're in this series where I'm trying to tackle the potential obstacles that hit our spiritual journey and are part of our spiritual formation. And I'm not sure that we think, I don't know, maybe some of these issues that are coming up in my head are ones that I'm wrestling with, and I'm global enough to think that whatever I'm wrestling with, other people might be wrestling with as well. And this one in particular has to do with my humanity, or your humanity. And it really is kind of shocking how easy it is to forget that we're human. Now, this enters into the spiritual journey because I think, quite honestly, in a lot of cases with people that I've talked to, and certainly with my own thinking, that if I'm going to talk about spiritual journey, then that really has nothing to do with the physical journey, the physical things that I experience in my body, in my relationships, and those sorts of things. And somehow we have segmented out our spiritual journey from all other journeys, if you will put it that way. The fascinating thing about this topic is, Jesus came in human form. The thing that we have to keep in mind is he went through all the same developmental milestones that you and I did. He was a little kid. He played with his friends in the neighborhood, although he had, I think, probably a very different experience than a lot of us did or do. I don't think young kids are listening to this, but than a lot of us had. Partly because if you think about it, in the culture he was in, and the fact that he was immaculately born, so his mom just appeared pregnant, and people's minds run. We hate stories that have gaps in them, so we fill in the gaps with usually the worst things that we can imagine. And I can just imagine that happened to young Mary. So when Jesus is born, it's known to the community that he was living in that he was this odd kid that was born out of wedlock. That's not a good thing on your record, at least in a social sense. So he experienced our humanity, the essence of being human. And that's the remarkable thing about it, right? I mean, that God would actually take human form. And we see our humanity in such a negative light that I'm not sure we grapple much with the humanity of Jesus. And that's not what tonight's about, but I want to make some of those connections before we get too far out of the gate. Now, let me give you a historical context for this, because there was a particular bishop in France, and his name was Irenaeus, Saint Irenaeus, and he had a connection to the last living person who had contact with the last living Apostle John. And it was Polycarp. I don't know who names these people these names. That sounds like, a name of somebody that, I don't know. I can't, my imagination is not running wild tonight. So anyway, Polycarp was a connection with the Apostle John. He taught, and Irenaeus sat as a child in the vicinity of the teaching of Polycarp. So he has this lineage, if you will, of apostolic authority because of his connection to Polycarp, whose connection is to the Apostle John. Okay, we got all that, right? And the thing that St. Irenaeus said that caught my attention, and it keeps surfacing, is he said, and this is what's unusual, okay? When we think of the glory of God, what do you think of? You think of certainly Jesus. We were told that he is the image of God's glory. So we think of that, but we don't think of us being connected to that in any way. We think of glory in terms of what we give God for being the sovereign king of the universe that he is. All of those accolades and appellations that are given to him on that score. But St. Irenaeus said something that caught my attention, and this is what he said. He said, the glory of God is humans fully alive, or man fully alive. And that captured my attention because I don't think we connect our humanity with God's glory. And so it comes into play as we enter into and participate in our own spiritual formation, our own spiritual journey, because we see our humanity as a drag on the system, as a negative thing. Now, there's inevitably going to be some reaction, because when I start talking about our humanity, we think sinful, broken humanity, but we don't think about the embodiment of our spirit in our bodies, our humanity. And so one of the things that I wrestle with and have to ask is, why is it so hard for us to remember that we're human? Now, let me give you context, because I've sat with students, I've sat with other people, and there seems to be a implicit, maybe even innate hatred of being human, to such a degree that we want to deny the realities of being human, like being limited and finite. And just remember, and this is something I've said before, I'll just repeat it again. I can intellectually assent to my finiteness, my limitations, okay? Yes, I can say those exist and go with that. But I never entirely grapple with what does it mean to have those kind of limitations. Because in a lot of cases, what we do with the fact that we are limited, that we're broken because of original sin, and we're broken in our relationships, and we're broken in our motivations toward one another and ourselves, what we do with that is to simply out of hand condemn it. We see nothing redeemable, dare I say it that way, nothing redeemable about that. And yet, Jesus came in human form to redeem us. And he also said, I came so that they might have life as humans, and life abundantly. Now, we think of these things in spiritual terms, but we don't think of them in human terms. And so we seem to be embarrassed by the fact that we're human. And that means I'm limited. I can't do everything. I can't be everything to everyone. We certainly try. And that's a whole other conversation when it comes to boundaries and things like that. But I can't do those things. And quite honestly, I hate that. As a matter of fact, our bent, so many people's bent, I don't know about you or who I'm speaking to in my audience, but our bent toward perfectionism and demandingness with ourselves seems to sit in stark denial of our humanity. Because if I accept my humanity, what does that mean? What does it mean? And it's not just, well, I accept the fact that I'm human. I got that. No, it means way more than that. Because we have cultivated a culture of shame within ourselves about being human. And while there is some truthfulness to the fact that our brokenness shows itself on a daily basis, sometimes even hourly basis throughout our days, and what do we do in response to that is condemn it. It never really occurs to us, I think, in a lot of cases, that acceptance is the beginning of change, not condemnation. And we do that with our humanity as well, because we wrestle with the constraints that we live in being human, in being distracted, in being spread out so thin we can't even think straight, or having so many demands on us, emotionally or otherwise, that we believe we should be able to accomplish or deal with those things at a certain level, not just accomplish or deal with them on any level, but at a certain level. And if I don't, I'm an abject failure. Or worse, if there is a worse, because then I live condemned. And that comes into play time and time and time again. So I can have somebody who is a Christ follower who ascribes and agrees with that we live by grace, but we don't live by grace. We live using grace for something, but we don't live by grace because we don't offer it to ourselves. And we don't because we condemn, fundamentally, we condemn our humanity. And in doing so, we end up condemning the means by which God moves into the world itself is through my humanity, even the flawed humanity of the whole thing. So we get this idea that what is the ultimate value is the spiritual life, and the human life is diminishing, it's fallen, it's broken. And this tension is the one that so often me as a counselor spend a lot of time talking with people about, because they want to use their spirituality against their humanity, and yet their humanity is the very vehicle by which their spirituality is expressed. It really is quite remarkable when you think about it. Isn't any wonder that we live stained glass lives? Because there are pieces of us, even our human form, that we condemn and say, well, that's not really that important. It's a drag on my existence and my spiritual desires and being close to God and knowing Him and all the things that go with it, including what is contained or what is connected to my humanity, my struggles with my body in a variety of forms, eating, sexuality, relationships, all of those things. And in some respects, in some situations, we blame our body for some of the things that where sin has fallen on us. And when we start doing that, then we fundamentally split ourselves, called dissociation. I sever myself from my bodily life and emphasize my spiritual life. And with that split comes a terrible cost. Because then when I want to bring all of myself into a relationship with someone, I have a condemned part that I don't want to be part of this relationship. And I have the spiritual, emotional part, perhaps, that I do want. But the problem is when I throw the circuits for the body part, the other ones get dimmed or limited. And then what do? I condemn my humanity even more. See, what has happened is the Greek philosophers, I believe it was Aristotle specifically, that split us into body and soul, body and spirit. And that the spirit was imprisoned in the body. I think I've got that right. I launched into this before I really made absolutely sure that is that's indeed the case, but I'm pretty sure it is. So we have this long legacy of our body being fundamentally dirty, bad. And so we live this dual life of I live my life in my body and then I live my life in the spirit. And yet God chose to have our spirits part of our bodily experiences in the world. How do we experience the world around us? But by our bodies, our senses, our experiences, our memories, all the things that our brain processes, all of that is a bodily experience. And yet we spend so much of our time oftentimes condemning that part of us because it's limited. By implication, we're saying it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be. And when I bump up against that, my reflex action is to condemn it rather than accept it, and maybe even look within that acceptance that there's something to be learned here. There's something to be reflected upon, if you will. So one of the things that our humanity does, and I'll just highlight this, one of the things, and this is why we have such ambivalence about it, is it reminds us of our limitations, and it reminds us of our lost expectations. We don't want to be reminded that we're limited. We really don't. We want to believe that we can live life without any limitations. in our relationships, in all sorts of spheres of our lives, and not really have to pay any consequences to our humanity and the struggles that we might have. You can take it in. The easiest place probably to notice is in the realm of addiction, because our bodies get addicted, dependent, physiologically dependent on a substance. But it's not just our body that's dependent on it. There's so much more when we talk about soul and spirit and what is intertwined into all of that. So there's this shadowy piece of us that is contained in our humanity that we think the best way to master it is to condemn it rather than to accept it. And that's why what St. Irenaeus said is a remarkable thing to reflect upon when he says the glory of God is in a human being fully alive, fully human. And so the other issue that inevitably comes up is that people hear when I talk about this or remind them, it's like, well, gosh darn, sorry, you're human, that they equate that with, well, if I accept the fact that I'm human, then I am accepting / condoning sinful behavior that is contained or brought about by my human limitations. And they're not the same thing. I can be weak. I can have weaknesses, and it doesn't necessarily lead me into sinfulness. Now, it can. Most of my compensations and most of my efforts are often a result of seeing my weaknesses and trying to compensate for them. And that leads me certainly into sinful behavior. Absolutely. And then we reflect our lineage, our ancestors, who said, I don't want to be limited. And that's exactly the touch point that Satan pressed on, is that you want to be God like God is. And our humanity simply reminds us of the fact that we're not. And that's part of what we don't like. And so is it the same as, is being human the same as being sinful? Yes, in a lot of ways it is, because our humanity has been corrupted as a result of original sin. And we're told it's being redeemed and sanctified in the process of our relationship with Jesus over our spiritual journey. But we still have to contend with somehow the fact that I am caught. If you use the word imprisoned, then it takes us into the world of punishment versus the wonders of being human and displaying the beauty of the imago Dei in me and in that humanity, the image of God in me, particularly in the nature of my relationality and how I desire it, my sense of belonging. In a lot of cases, we get sidetracked and condemn our sense of belonging because it leads us into quote unquote bad things. And if it leads us into bad things, then we become bad people. So the thing I want to point out and try to land this plane is, why is this such a threat to our spiritual formation? And the threat is our willingness to accept our humanity, not our willingness to condone or turn a blind eye to my sinfulness. But the limits of my humanity is also the wonder of how I can reach beyond that in my relationships with others and myself, and even my relationship with God. If our humanity is such an awful thing, then you would think he would deliver us from it after we accept Christ and accept his lordship and move into that domain. It was like we'd be free of this body. But all you have to do is go to Romans 7 and hear Paul bemoan the fact that he was in that body and who would save him from this body of death, and at the same time His entire ministry was done in that body of death. It was a testimony to the wonder of God's redemption that that very body of death was the vehicle by which he won so many people to a saving understanding of who Jesus was and their relationship with God. And, might I add, their relationship with each other. Because our relationship with one another depends on our humanity. It's not that we do some kind of mind meld and now we have connection. No, it's through our senses, it's through our experiences, it's through our humanity that we experience that very relationality. So our acceptance of our humanity is the potentiation of our spiritual formation. The acceptance of being human and being in the process of being redeemed actually can empower us to move into the world with confidence, not arrogance, but with confidence that I'm created as I was supposed to be. Yes, I'm broken. Yes, I'm stuck with this war inside of me. I get all that. But it's also the vehicle by which God touches people through me, my humanity. And the interesting thing is the more willing I am to wrestle with my humanity, the more human I become to others. If I work overtime to reject and condemn my humanity, the less accessible I am to other humans who are reminded day in and day out of their finitude, their limitations, their imperfections, their things, that the aspects of them that they feel makes them condemned to other people as well. See, that's the wild part of this. And Paul points to the fact that the comfort and the encouragement and the compassion I feel from God is part of this legacy of passing that along to others. And as we understand that in our humanity, we pass it on to others in their humanity, and there is hope to be found. And so it's a bigger deal than you think. And it's a motivation for engaging fully this process of our development in Jesus and with Jesus and in our relationship with one another, not reflexively condemning it, but accepting and living within it. And out of that, tremendous power can occur. There have been more moments in time as I have walked this my journey and been invited into other people's journeys, lots of other people's journeys. It's really quite remarkable as a counselor because you're actually invited in to that. And in the past, just to give you some perspective of my understanding of that, in the past, at least 2 or 3 of my different private practices, I had 2 or 3 iterations of it. Most of them at the front end had the name Paraclete in it. And Paraclete comes from the Greek word counselor, but the long definition is one called to come alongside. So as a counselor, I'm invited to walk alongside somebody for a season, and it's in my embodied form that redemption is experienced by somebody who's had the courage to invite somebody like me into it. And that's the stuff of remarkable, transformative power. And it's delivered by our humanity. Not by condemning it, but by accepting it, living fully in it, just like Jesus did. He was hungry. He faced difficulty. He faced questions of his identity. He faced walking around with a bunch of dudes that didn't know they're from a hole in the ground because they were walking around with God, seeing miracle after miracle, and they still at times didn't get it. Welcome to their humanity. And that's the backdrop to what I'm talking about here, and why it is so important to not condemn but accept our humanity and understand that it is the very vehicle by which God has given us to reach into other humans' lives. And with all the flaws, all the limits, all the finiteness, it's on that basis that we find the ground on which we stand with one another to be sacred ground. It really is. And I've seen that so many times in the silent retreat, in my moments of doing groups with people. And I'm sitting there shaking and getting goosebumps because it's clear that the Holy Spirit is there with humans that are powerfully connecting in a way only humans can do. And that's why it's so important. So rather than just simply dismissing it, acting like it's not there, I'm going to use my effort to diminish the importance of it. Rather than that, walk into being fully human tomorrow and take note of what happens as a result, rather than starting the day saying, "Oh, I am so tired of being human." Now, I think a lot of us say that. I say that. It's like, I'm getting older. I hate being reminded of getting older. That's part of being human. But at the same time, there's also this element of, this is the theater in which I connect with other people. This is the place, the forum in which I do that. And I invite you just to pay attention to that in the days ahead before we meet again, whatever time that is. So, again, thanks so much for joining me. A few things just to remind you, some really important things. We are heading into another retreat. And it is severely underfunded. I would pray for your prayers and for your consideration in partnering with us to make these retreats possible, not only for new alumni that have left CCU, they're in graduate training, there's other places, and they're looking to further engage that humanity and be part of a small community of people that sit in God's presence in silence and solitude and listen for what he has for them. Because it's a remarkable moment in time that silence opens this window where the eternal God can meet us in time, and we can experience something that maybe we never really expected to find. So I would humbly request or have you consider how you can partner with us to begin to build up our partner or our scholarship fund that makes it possible for students to participate in the silent retreat that's coming up. We've got one in May, and then we have two more scheduled for the fall for students coming into CCU and others that have heard about this, and we have people already signed up for that one, and we have one in September and another one in October that will make it possible for students to experience this kind of thing. So if you want to partner with us in that, I would be humbly grateful. To do that, you can either go to the website, the drmitch.com, and under CCU, down at the bottom at Silent Retreats, there's a donate button now at the bottom of the page. You can do that. You can either say, well, I'll sign up for $15 a month for a while. Great. That would be wonderful. Or just simply make a donation to make this upcoming retreat possible for the students that have committed themselves to going or coming. Actually, we have some that are coming from out of state. So all of your gifts are tax deductible. If you'd rather send a check, you can do that as well. Just make your envelope out to 1615.tv, P.O. Box 1777, Castle Rock, Colorado, 80104. On the check, you'd make it out to 1615.tv, 1615.tv. They are our fiscal sponsor. They make it possible for us to be able to offer tax-deductible gifts as a means of donation. So there's all of that. It's a very important item. It's part of the passion of my own heart to engage and continue finding and inviting the next generation into maybe a different way of engaging their spiritual journey. The other thing is, if what you hear tonight is interesting and you want to hear more, please subscribe on the website. You can go to our website and say, keep me informed, and you can sign up there, or you can subscribe in your favorite podcast provider, whether that's Spotify or Stitcher or iTunes or Amazon Music, any of those platforms. You can find us and subscribe, become a follower, and if this is helpful, turn on other people to doing it. It's more the merrier in a lot of ways. Of course, it's just me and my screen, but I'm always thinking about the people that I talk about, the topics I talk about, and the people that might be interested in doing that. So we've also launched the blog on the website, and we will have other writers throughout the summer to make contributions throughout. So you can find that at drmitch.com. MITSCH, the S is silent, but that's the website to do that. And give us if you have questions, DM me on Instagram. It will get forwarded on to me by my social media team. I'm not real big on spending much time on social media. That's what I ask them to do for me. So if I will be alerted if you have a question. I'd love to entertain questions like that. To make it part of the content of the podcast itself. So I think that's it. Thanks so much for joining me. I would invite you back for our 100th episode next week. I hope to have some fun things in store just to look back and then chart a course for the future in the next 100 episodes that would be coming up as well. I can be found on Instagram at the Psych Monologues, on Facebook, ray.mitch, and then on LinkedIn at drmitch. So any of those ways, we've got a variety of ways that you can connect with me and ask questions or have some further dialogue about whatever the topic is that you're most interested in. I will say this, is that before too long on the website, there will be a new video posted. I just did a presentation for Quiet Cave, and Quiet Cave is a ministry here in the Denver area that makes space in the church for mental health and conversations about that. They do groups for adolescents and adults on a variety of topics and areas. They have a great workbook that they just published and put forth to guide the conversations. They had one for the adults as well. Great ministry. Check them out, quietcave.org. But I did a talk on safe people and boundaries and how to connect with youth through that, with those as the parameters and understanding, and how it can potentiate how we connect the generations together, because we continue to have that as part of the background. So that you can find that on the website. It'll be coming up soon to get posted. And like I said, I invite you back. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. And as always, love ya. Later. Bye.